Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Wild Werewolf. Are you ready to embark on a wild and thrilling journey into the world of werewolves? Here, we'll explore the untamed nature, the raw power, and the captivating stories of these mythical creatures. So, get comfortable and let's unleash the wildness together. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 15. It had been a week since I had developed my new power. Every spare minute I got was spent practicing in my fighting skills. Andrew and Davo had to literally drag me to bed every night, with me complaining and asking for 5 more minutes like a small child with a play date that ended early. It's amazing how much one power can do. The strange haze acted as a sort of shield, since whenever someone was to touch it, they would be shot back a good 30 feet. We had tried so many different things with it, to test its full abilities. I couldn't put it around other people, which had disappointed Connor, but we found that nothing could penetrate it. We tried having me running into things, which only resulted in the destruction of those things. They tried stabbing it with a knife, which only resulted in the wielder of the knife being shot backwards with the knife bent in hand. My shield was powerful, but would it be powerful enough? As I practiced, a new power surfaced. I could move objects with my mind. Telekinesis, I believe it's called. A power that James and I had in common, though how my match to his, I was not sure. Ellie and Cease had been hanging around me the past week. They knew of my past, I assumed from Andrew. They didn't try to talk to me about it, which I was grateful for. They had become my good friends. I had never really had girlfriends before, but it was kind of nice. Sometimes Cease would come visit Ellie and me in our room overnight, and we would just talk about random and seemingly irrelevant things. Cease was absolutely shocked when she found out I had never had a sleepover before. Cease was a nice girl, always happy and trying to find the best in people. But the thing about her was she never stopped talking. It's not that I minded. She was interesting to listen to, but she gave me her whole life story in 10 minutes. Her parents had been divorced and her mom was married to a man similar to my father. So one day she ran away. She had just stumbled upon this house and Connor had asked her to join. Obviously, she had said yes. She had never met Danny in person, but she had heard everything about him from Connor and Andrew. Her eyes softened and her cheeks went red when she talked about Connor. It was easy to see her infatuation with him, though she never voiced it. Ellie was a little more complicated. She never really talked about her past, though I had the idea it was just too painful. Whenever I would ask a question or she would accidentally let something slip, her eyes would glaze over as if she was traveling through her memories, back to a time not so happy as now. We were all sitting outside at a picnic table I never noticed. We each had some kind of food in our hand, Andrew an apple, Ellie a granola bar, Cease a small bag of chips, and Davo, Connor and ice sandwiches. Ellie broke a small part of her granola bar and threw it at Andrew, hitting him straight in the eye. Oh, he yelled, covering his eye with his hand. What the hell? Cease reached an arm up and smacked him in the back of the head. Language, Andrew. We all started laughing as he held his eye was hiding in his head with the other. Just then, I spotted a young girl, maybe 2 years younger than me, walking towards the tree line. She was turning her head from side to side, as if to make sure no one saw her, her stormy blue eyes darting everywhere nervously. She had her hands in her jeans pocket and kept her back slightly bent forwards. For just a short moment, her eyes locked with mine. She gave me a suspicious look before sprinting off into the trees with her reddish, blonde hair waving behind her. Who was that? I asked Andrew, who was still holding his eye. Yeah, what was with her? Said Davo, having noticed her too. That's Bailey, he said, blinking his eye furiously as he took his hand off it. She doesn't really talk much, and she spends most of her time in the woods alone. No one's exactly sure what she does. He shrugged. Where'd she come from? I found her half dead in the forest. Connor chimed in. We brought her back and fixed her up. We think she was previously part of Danny's pack, but we can't be sure. She won't talk about it. I stared at the place where the strange girl and disappeared. Something about that girl put me on edge. Something that I just couldn't put my finger on. Andrew and I were sitting in his room, playing gin rummy again. We used to always play this when we were kids. I've only ever beaten him once, and I've always had my suspicions that he'll win. I was here reluctantly, since I would much rather be training, but he said I needed a rest. "You've been working yourself like crazy for a week, Mags," he had said. "You need to take it easy. You'll just wear yourself out if you keep going like this." And when Andrew had his mind set about something, there was no point in arguing with him. So here I was, sitting in his room, wasting valuable time. He was shuffling the cards for a new game when something came to my mind. "Hey, Enria. When I was in Danny's camp, something happened. Remember when I told you Gage practically killed me in the training field?" His eyes narrowed. "Well, after that, I heard Danny and Jason talking. Danny said, 'You can't fall for every helpless girl that comes into this camp. You know what happened last time. I forgave it that time, but don't think I will again.'" I could remember his words perfectly. Do you know what he was talking about? Yeah, I do. He looked down, but I think you should be talking to Ellie about that. Not me. Ellie. What the hell does Ellie have to do with anything? Yeah, just trust me. I jumped up before he could say anything else. Fine. If he won't tell me, then I'll just take his advice. I ran down the hall to my room. As I reached my hand out to open the door, I hesitated. What am I going to say? Just walk in there and say, "So Ellie, I heard about you and Jason." Yeah. I'm sure that would go over well. My hand hovered uncertainly over the handle for a moment before I took a deep breath and twisted it, pushing the door open. "Ellie," I called, half hoping she wasn't there. Yeah, she called back. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" I walked all the way into the room and sat on my bed. Ellie was lounging on the windowsill, reading a book. She looked up and turned her eyes to me. "Yeah, sure. What about?" I rubbed the back of my neck nervously, looking away from her searching eyes. "Come on, kid. Spit it out." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself and keep from stuttering. When I was in Danny's camp, Jason mentioned something. "Well, someone," I said in a rush. "Danny said to him, 'You can't fall for every helpless girl that comes into this camp.' You know what happened last time. I forgave it that time, but don't think I will again." I asked Andrew what he was talking about, and he said that I should really be asking you that. So here I am. I chuckled nervously. She looked kind of shocked by my rush of words. I don't think I've ever heard someone talk that fast before. Well, maybe cease, but still. "You mean me to repeat? Please say no, please say no, no. No, I got it." She sighed and ran her fingers through her long light brown hair. Well, I guess since Andrew couldn't keep his trap shut and I don't want you making wild conclusions based on what you've heard, there's no real use in keeping it a secret any longer. She rested her elbows on her knees, folded her hands together, and settled her chin on them. About a year and a half ago, I was at home alone, watching TV. Someone knocked at the door and I answered it. It was Danny, though I didn't understand the significance of that at the time. It was winter at the time and he asked if we wanted our walk shoveled and if my parents were home. Like the idiot I am, I told him they weren't and asked if he could maybe stop by another time. Before I really knew what was happening, someone grabbed me from behind and knocked me out. I woke up with Gage and Danny standing over me. They cut me and tested my blood for the werewolf gene, and as it turns out, I had it. He bit me and, well, you know what happens after that. I nodded my head. "How do they test your blood for the gene?" I asked. "You know how we can't manipulate silver." "Well, our blood doesn't like it much either. Basically, they take blood from you and put it on a plate or something that has some silver in it. When the blood hits the silver, it turns black and clots up. I remembered back to when I had first been kidnapped, when Gage had stuck that knife into my arm. So many things from my recent past that had confused me and gnawed at my consciousness since were now coming to light with the help of Connor, Andrew, and their pack. The tangle of mystery and confusion that was confining my mind was beginning to slowly unravel. Okay, go on. After I woke up, they towed me into their training sessions and all that. For a while, it wasn't too bad, except for that stupid collar. But then Jason. Well, we started to talk and hang out during the day, and well, pretty soon we fell in love. Gage didn't like that. I never really knew why he took such offense, but he did. He treated me differently. He was harsher with the training and always found some way to make my life miserable. Before long, I had had it and wanted out. Jason and I were planning to run away together. The night we had planned to run, Danny was waiting in the woods for us. I'm not sure who told him or why or how they even found out, but somehow, he knew. We fought back. But they beat the crap out of both of us. Jason managed to kill 2 guards, but it wasn't enough. He told me to run, and I did. I didn't stop running for hours. I wasn't even aware that I was still running. My body was completely disconnected from my brain. I got to some coffee shop and just broke down. I sat at a table and cried my eyes out. A few of the people in the shop left because I was making so much noise, but the workers probably just didn't have the heart to kick me out. I was so sure that Jason was dead and that Danny would come looking for me. Then I heard the bell ring and I smelled a werewolf in the shop. I immediately thought it was Danny or Gage and jumped to get ready to run, but it was Jason, covered in blood and dirt. I was crying my eyes out and he just held me. A lone air rolled down Allie's cheek as her shoulder shivered slightly. We stayed wherever we could, pretty much in parks and things like that. One night we slept in a camping clearing in a smaller branch of woods just west of here. We thought that since people tended to come there that Danny wouldn't. When I woke up the next morning, Jason was gone. I waited in that clearing for hours before he came back. I was so relieved to see that he was okay. That is until Danny and his goons came walking up behind him. Danny put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did the right thing, Jason." Jason just nodded his head as 2 guys came up to me and tied my hands behind my back. He looked hurt and regretful when our eyes met, but I didn't care how sorry he felt. Her upper lip curled slightly in anger and disgust. I fought off the guards and ran like hell, not even bothering to look back. I eventually stumbled on this house. Well, it was smaller then, but you get the point. Connor took me in and I've been here ever since. Her teeth clenched around her lower lip as she chewed on it nervously. I can still remember what it felt like. When he held me, when he kissed me, when he betrayed me. Her voice cracked on the last 2 words. Her bottom lip was trembling uncontrollably as more tears flowed down her now red cheeks. Can you just? She was now full on sobbing, her shoulders shaking, her chest heaving in sobs. I knew she wanted me to leave. Ellie was one of those kinds of people that doesn't like to let people see her cry. That doesn't like to show weakness. Yeah, sure, I said, standing. I put a hand on her shoulder as I walked to the door. Thank you for telling me. I knew the last thing people wanted to hear in this situation was "I'm sorry." She just nodded at me, though that was probably the only thing she was capable of at the moment. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, my own chest wanting to heave in sobs. I knew what it felt like to be betrayed by him. That feeling of heartbreak and treachery is not something I would wish on anybody. Except for maybe him. That anxiety, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my world spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. For what he did to Ellie and me, he deserved so much more. I slid my back against the door until I was sitting on the carpeted hallway floor. I leaned my head against the door and closed my eyes, fighting the tears that were threatening to overflow. I couldn't get Ellie's face out of my head, sobbing, eyes red, cheeks flooded with tears. Why do I have to be so damn curious? Why couldn't I have just dropped it instead of making her drudge up all those horrible old memories? 'Cause you're a selfish bitch. Gee, thanks. Oh, come on. It wasn't your fault. It's not like you were the one that betrayed her. Yeah, but I made her think about it. I made her remember. Quit beating yourself up about it. It won't change anything, yeah. I guess you're right. Hey, Mags, Andrew said, snapping me out of my thoughts. I opened my eyes and looked up at him. He met my gaze. His emerald eyes boring into mine in the soul, seeking manner they always did when he was thinking. His chest was completely bare and I couldn't help but stare at him. He wasn't the lanky skin and bone that I knew growing up anymore. His chest was now perfectly sculpted, everything from his perfect pecs to his 8-pack that lead in a V shape by his hips would put any Olympian to shame. His arms were no different. Toned muscles clear under the tan skin but not bulging to the point of looking like some guy from professional wrestling. My eyes raked across his chest, down his ABS and back up again uncontrollably. He cleared his throat. So she told ya. He sounded uneasy under my gaze. Hey, lover girl. Snap out of it. I shook my head and tried to keep my focus on his face. Yup. Are you okay? He asked, giving me a weird look. Yeah, I'm fine. I tried to sound reassuring, but I was most likely failing. All right then. You want to go get something to eat? Yeah, sure. He turned and I followed him, staring at his deliciously muscular back. Maddox Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Whoa, Maddox Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Delicious. Focus, Maggie. Focus. This is Andrew we're talking about here. Then my eyes came across something odd. You have a tattoo, I exclaimed. Really? I didn't notice. He replied sarcastically. I smacked him on his arm. But seriously, since when do you have a tattoo? It's a pack thing, he replied. I looked at his tattoo more closely. It was one black, unbroken line that twisted into a paw print at the top, right between his shoulder blades, and spiraled down to make an upside-down human handprint that rested along the length of his spine. Will I get one? I asked. When you become an official part of the pack, yes. Do I have to get it on my back? No, you can get it anywhere you want. I've always wanted a tattoo. I mumbled, mostly to myself. He chuckled. Come on, let's go get some lunch. Okay, it was kind-FY, but trust me, the next one will be much more interesting. P. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 16. It had been just yesterday when Ellie had told me of her past. Thankfully, nothing had changed between us. There was no awkwardness or tension to speak of. If anything, we were even more comfortable around each other. It was a late morning, no later than noon, and I was walking through the woods. Walking the trails was always therapeutic for me. The sounds of the birds chirping soothed my mind when it was troubled. The cool, fresh air caused my heart to stop beating quite so rapidly when I was stressed or angry. The forest had and always will be my true home, my sanctity. The sound of overjoyed laughter took me out of my thoughts. I followed the sound to a large rock that stuck out of the ground like a cliff. As I approached, the sound got louder and louder. I peeked over the little cliff to see that girl. Bailey, I think, rolling in the brush with 3 wolf pups. Real timber wolves, not werewolves. The mother wolf was sitting at the opening of the small cave that the rock cliff had formed, looking lovingly at the pups and the girl. Bailey had a look of absolute joy on her face, one that would belong to a young child on Christmas morning. She turned around, still smiling gleefully, with the pups climbing all over her. Her eyes locked with mine and her smile immediately faded. The wolves sensed her change of mood and turned to stare at me. The pups looked at me with confusion while the mother looked at me warily, the hair on her back beginning to stand up. What are you doing here? Bailey stuttered. I was taking a walk and I heard you laughing. I looked over at the mother wolf, remembering how she had looked at Bailey. Why do they accept you like that? Isn't she worried you'll hurt her pups? Bailey looked shocked. I would never do that. I didn't say you would. It's just that mother wolves tend to be really protective of their pups. I'm just surprised she lets you play with them like that. I took a step forward and the mother wolf growled at me in a warning to stay where I was. Bailey got up and went over to the wolf, placing a hand on her bristling neck and whispering something to her. The wolf immediately relaxed and sat back on her haunches. Do you come out here a lot? I asked her. YA pretty much every day. She looked down and smiled shyly. Can you not tell anyone, please? She bit her lip and looked up at me through her long eyelashes. Not if you don't want me to. Then why don't you want me to? It's just, I don't know. She huffed and sat down. One of the pups immediately hopped into her lap and she began to stroke its small back. It's the only place I feel comfortable, like my own little sanctuary, and I don't want anyone taking that away from me. And I just don't like people knowing what I do all the time. I nodded and sat beside her. Can I ask you something, Bailey? You can ask, but I won't guarantee I'll answer. Okay, well. Where are you from? How did you become what you are? She opened her mouth to say something, but I interrupted her. Same rules apply. I won't tell anyone if you don't want me to. She nodded. I was running away. Again. You see, my parents were never really around and child services took me away from them. They shipped me to some group home. I can't tell you how many times I ran away from there. But this time, instead of the police finding me, someone, well, I should say something else found me. Some digest, grabbed me and bit me. I fainted, and when I woke up he was there and I was in his house. He said that I had to do what he said or he'd kill me. And for a while I did. He told me what I was and taught me how to hunt and everything. But if I screwed up, her voice cracked and she shut her eyes tight. I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She took a deep breath and continued. This time I couldn't run away. I tried, but that just made things worse. Then one day I just exploded. She stuck her hand out in front of her. I jumped when a flame encased her pale fingers. She twisted and turned her hand, examining the blaze of orange and yellow. I left his house in ashes, with him inside. The fire disappeared from her hand and she wrapped it around her knees. Are you an Deuce? She interrupted. Apparently, I had no idea what I was called until you came along. I thought I was just a freak. When Connor found me half dead in the forest, I never told him. He gave me a place to stay. He was nice to me. I didn't want to ruin that by telling them what I was and what I had done. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. She turned her face toward me and smiled. Thanks for listening. I still don't understand why the wolves like you so much. Aren't they afraid? I looked over at the wolf pups that were now fighting amongst one anther since their sparring buddy had left them. No, they see us werewolves as family in a way. So what else can you do? Besides the whole fire thing, I can turn into a tiger and I can camouflage myself. Camouflage? She looked meaningfully up at me right before she disappeared from sight. Bailey. I called, looking around. I'm right here, answered the empty air where Bailey had once been. I reached my hand out to the seemingly empty space. My hand touched what felt like the sleeve to a t-shirt and an arm. I grabbed her arm and raised it, just vaguely seeing the outline of it as the background rolled across it. Interesting, I muttered. She appeared again and smiled. You can let go of my arm now. Oh, yes, Ari, I said, releasing her arm. Hey, can I try something? Depends on what it is. Well, I can put up a shield around me. I let the haze cover my arm to demonstrate. I haven't been able to put around anyone else, but I was wondering if, since your name is Deuce, it would work. What happens if it doesn't? She looked at me skeptically. You'll get thrown about 20 feet back. She shrugged. I'm in okay. I slowly raised my hand toward her, concentrating very hard on keeping my shield from hurting her. I slowly and carefully curled my fingers around her arm. Nothing happened. I thought hard about expanding the shield around her body. The haze began to crawl up her arm and cover her completely. I looked up at her and smiled. She smiled back. I let go of her arm to see if the haze would stay. As the haze split apart, I could feel both of them as separate beings. Like instead of one extra arm, I had two. Cool, she said, looking at her haze-covered body. I let the haze travel back to me, then made it disappear entirely. Bailey, I think you should tell Connor or Andrew. It could be very helpful. Her eyes widened in worry. No, please don't tell them. Okay, I said reassuringly. I won't tell them. I'm just saying it would be a great help to have another Emuvo Deuce on our side, and it could be a problem if we don't let them in on it. I don't want anyone to know unless they have to. All right, just keep it in mind. I looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, night only a short while away. We should be getting back. Yeah, I guess so. We walked back in silence to the house. Before we went in the door, she stopped me. Thanks so much for listening, Maggie, and for keeping my secret. Anytime, Bailey. I smiled and she returned it. Good night. She waved goodbye to me as she ran to her room. Night, I called after her. I decided to grab a bottle of water before heading to bed. As I was walking out of the kitchen, I collided with someone. We both fell backwards so that we were sitting on the ground, facing each other. Sorry, I mumbled, getting up. Yeah, you should be, she sneered, standing as well. Her wavy blonde hair that had only the remnants of a loose bun was now flowing on her shoulders. She glared at me with electric blue eyes that seemed to pierce me through. Wait, I know that voice. Then suddenly the memory came to me. How she feels doesn't matter. These are lives we're talking about, Andrew. A lot of lives. You want to sacrifice all those lives just because it'll emotionally scar this girl. She was the girl that was arguing with Andrew a week ago. The one that talked about me like I was some sort of trash. What's your name? I asked. If she's going to hate me, I should at least know her name. Sasha, if you must know. Now get out of my way. She shoved me hard to the side and pushed her way into the kitchen. What was her problem? Werewolf Forest, Chapter 17, are you sure about this? Bailey whispered to me. Positive. You don't have to tell them anything you don't want to. Just be yourself and stop worrying so much. You've lived with these people for how long now? A few years. But Maggie, I've never really talked to them. Well, you will today. I pulled on her hand and all but dragged her over to the picnic table where Cease, Ellie, Connor, Davo, and Andrew were sitting. Hey guys, I greeted them. They all turned to return the greeting with a smile, but the smile faded when they saw Bailey. Hey Megs, Andrew said, looking confused. Who you got there? Well, I think you all know Bailey. She will be hanging with us from now on. They all gave me a quizzical look but voiced no objections. Andrew, skid over. Andrew moved over some so Bailey and I were squeezed between him and Ciso. Bailey hesitated. I don't think I've ever actually introduced myself properly, and though Maggie did a wonderful job, I'd rather do it myself. So, I'm Bailey. It's nice to meet you. There was a short, awkward silence before Andrew cut in. Hey Bailey, I'm Andrew. He smiled reassuringly at her. It's nice to meet you too. I mouthed thank you to him and he gave a slight nod of his head and smiled. After he had finished, it set off the introductions around the table, everyone saying their name and beginning to talk to Bailey, saying that they were glad to meet her and asking her an important breaker questions. Once everyone started to talk, Bailey relaxed and seemed to actually be enjoying herself. I could tell she was going to fit in really well, even if she never did tell them the truth. I awoke to the soft pitter-patter of rain against my window. I jumped up like a kid realizing it was a snow day and ran down the hall like a mad woman. As I all but flew to the front door, I accidentally awoke Davo, who was still sleeping on the couch. "What's going on?" he asked, alerted. "It's raining." I squealed, jumping up and down and clapping my hands. "Yeah," he said, looking at me like I was crazy. "So," I groaned. "Come on." I grabbed his hand and dragged him out to the front yard. As I left the house, I felt the first of many raindrops plop onto my nose. I took a deep breath as the sheets of pouring rain soaked me through, though it wasn't that great of a feat since I was still in my PJs that consisted of flannel shorts and a commie. The air was cool and fresh, like it always was when it rained. When I was younger, I would dance in the rain with my mother, often to the tune of her chime, like voice filling the air with the whimsical notes of singing in the rain. "I'm singing in the rain," she would sing, "just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling." Unhappy again, and for however short a time, we were happy again. We could dance and sing and splash our worries away for however long we could without catching a cold, though we often did anyway. A single tear rolled down my cheek, only discernible from the rain by the warm trail it left behind, as I danced and remembered. I spun in a circle with my arms out wide, loving the feeling of the rain on my bare skin. It had been so long since I had felt the rain. I mean, sure, it had rained a lot since the last time I had done this, but since my mom had died, I had never felt the same way. Every time it rained, I sat in my room with the curtains blocking out all light, crying my eyes out. A smile spread across my lips as I turned to find Davo. "Come on, Davo," I yelled. He was standing as close to the door as he could get without actually being inside the house. "No way, Pix. You can catch the flu if you want, but I'd rather not," he yelled back. A sly grin sneaked across my face as I raised my hand toward him. His eyes narrowed. "Don't you die," his word got off as I lifted him into the air and into the rain. "Put me down," he demanded, flailing his arms about okay. I lowered my hand and dropped him, but first, into a nice, deep puddle hay. He yelled, jumping up. "That was so not fair, Pixie. What's your point?" I smiled. "Hey, since you're already wet, you might as well have some fun." I grabbed his arm and pulled him behind me as I ran across the yard. He kept up well as we ran. We began to dance together and twirl in the rain, getting our feet dirty with the now muddy earth beneath us. He laughed, a deep rumble in his chest that could match the thunder, when I slipped and fell into a puddle. "Now you know what it feels like." He put his hands on his knees to support himself as he laughed harder and harder. And his laugh was just so happy, so genuine, that I couldn't help but laugh too. I stood up and swiftly pushed him, headfirst this time, into the puddle hay. He exclaimed, brushing some mud off of his golden brown hair. "That's what you get." I started to run away, but I could hear his sloshing footsteps in hot pursuit. Davo caught up to me and grabbed my wrist. "I got you now." His words stopped short as I spun into his chest, my soaked body pressing against his. I could feel his warm breath tickling my wet nose as we stood there, unmoving. A strange look came over his eyes as he reached one hand up to gently caress my cheek. He ran his thumb from my nose to my cheekbone and back again, making me shiver. His hand found its way around my neck and pulled my face, ever so slowly, closer to his. Just as he was about to press his lips to mine, I was ripped from his grasp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Andrew growled at Davo, his hair beginning to clump together from the rain. Davo didn't answer. He was still standing there, stunned. "Come on, Maggie. We're leaving." Andrew began to pull me towards the house. This seemed to snap Davo back to his senses. "Maybe she doesn't want to go with you." He glared at Andrew as he grabbed my other arm, jerking me towards him. "Well, I doubt she wants to stay here with you." Andrew yanked on my arm, pulling me closer to him again. "What are we? A tug of war rope. Okay, both of you cut it out." I yelled, wrenching my arms from their grasps. Before I could utter another word, Andrew leapt at Davo. Davo instantly shifted into his light brown wolf form to join Andrew's almost black one, and fought back. I watched in shock as they rolled in the mud with teeth and claws bared dead like knives in search of flesh to rip. Cries of pain and anger erupted from the TUS sling ball of fur. "Stop," I yelled. "Stop." I put both of my hands out and ripped them off of each other, each one snarling and snapping as they hung there, helpless in the air cluttered with the falling drops. "Both of you cool it now." I put them back on the ground, but kept them from being able to get near each other. "Davo, go." "Inside." I ordered Andrew. "I need to talk to you." They had stopped the snarling but still glared at each other with murder in their eyes. I released Davo first and watched him closely as he trotted silently into the house. I walked over to Andrew so I could stare him straight in the eyes. I released him and he stayed where he was. Shift back. Now he did as I said without hesitation. Smart move on his part. I looked around at the people standing in the doorway that now had their full attention rained on us. I motioned for him to follow me and walked into the trees, away from the penetrating eyes of the shocked spectators. The rain slightly let up under the covering of jade green leaves. When we were just far enough in to be out of sight, I whirled on him, almost making him bump into me. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, throwing my hands in the air. "He was about to kiss you." He said the last two words with disgust. "Even if he was, how is that any of your business?" "Because it just is, Mags. Drop it, please." "No, I will not drop it," I screamed. "You just freaking attacked Davo for no good reason. So what if he was about to kiss me?" "Why do you care?" "Because I love you," he bellowed. My mouth dropped. "Andrew loves me, you." "You what?" He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment before stepping closer to me. He placed his hands gently on my shoulders and looked longingly into my eyes. "I love you, Mags. I always have. Ever since kindergarten. That day you fell off your chair and hurt your arm. You remember that. You were crying and I held you until you stopped. Ever since that day I've loved you. You're my best friend, Mags. I know you better than anyone else. I may not have some annoying little nickname for you like Pixie, but I love you more than Avo ever will. I couldn't let him kiss you. I just couldn't. I love you." Before I had time to react, he had grabbed the back of my neck and crashed his lips to mine. His lips were gentle but kneading as they moved against my frozen lips. At first I stayed absolutely still, not responding, but not rejecting either. Before long, the feeling of his lips against mine blocked out any other thought in my head and I kissed him back. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pressed my body against his. His hands traveled down my sides and rested on my hips, pulling them closer to his body. I weaved my fingers through his soaking wet hair in an effort to pull him even closer, if that were possible. Everything else in the world seemed to disappear as my lips moved in sync with his. A shower of sparks flooded my body as we held tight to each other, never wanting to let go. A warmth like nothing I'd ever felt before surged through me, intensifying with every second we held to each other. His hand caressed my cheek as he pushed my back against a tree. Every thought in my brain was now trained on his lips against mine. Everything else had been washed away with the rain. There was no thinking, only feeling. We broke for air, our breathing labored and shallow, our bodies still pressed to each other. That few seconds was all my brain needed to kick back into gear. What am I doing? I pushed him away, a confused and hurt look crossing his face. I have to go. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the house before he could reply. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 18. I woke up in the morning, my eyelids heavy and my head throbbing. I had barely slept a wink that night, confusing dreams plaguing every minute that I had been able to drift off. I sat up and put my head in my hands. My brain was swirling with uncertainty and confusion, causing the room to spin around me. When Andrew kissed me, I responded. I replayed that moment in my mind over and over and over. I could still feel his soft lips pressed against mine, the sparks that spread through my body, leading smoldering embers in their trail. I had never felt like this before. It was all new and strange and, quite honestly, it scared me. I just didn't know what to think anymore. He said he had loved me since kindergarten. I now rethought every hug, every time we held hands, every touch, every word he said. It had all meant something different to him than it did to me. Something more. Much, much more. I suddenly felt the need to take a shower, maybe in hopes that the water would wash away some of the confusion, that the warm vapor would somehow help me clear my head. I swung my legs over my bed, jumping slightly when my feet touched the cold floor, and grabbed some cloths from the duffel bag Connor had given me when I got here. My feet tread softly against the ground as I silently opened my door, not wanting to wake Ellie. The door clicked behind me and I turned around only to be met with Davo's face a mere foot from mine. I froze and stayed silent, waiting for him to say something. Hey. He smiled and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Look, pics about yesterday. It's cool, Davo. I interrupted him, his brows crunched up in confusion. I get it. It was just the heat of the moment. We can just forget it happened, okay? His face dropped slightly as he processed what I was saying. Yeah? Sure, he said, looking at my feet. Heat of the moment. He mumbled something inaudible while shaking his head. Well, I'm going to go take a shower. See you around, Davo. I pushed past him and walked toward the stairs. See ya, he mumbled as I walked by. I tried not to think about his dejected face as I opened the door to the large bathroom. Tried, being the key word here. I grabbed a towel from the closet and walked into the nearest stall. The water felt good as it washed the dirt and the mud off of me from the previous day. As good as the water felt, it did nothing to my state of mind. I couldn't help the knot of pain in my stomach, though whether it was from the confusion with Andrew, finding out our friendship was a lie, Davo's hurt face that I hoped I had just imagined, or any of the other things gnawing away at me. I didn't know. I hated hurting Davo, but what happened between us could be forgotten, ignored. We could go back to the way we were before. But if I had let him continue, it might not have been so easily forgotten anymore. Unfortunately, that couldn't be done with Andrew. What he said could not be forgotten or ignored, that was for sure. The water running cold took me out of my thoughts. I turned the water off and wrapped my towel around me. After I was dry enough, I got dressed, grabbed my dirty cloths and towel and headed back to my room. Maggie, I froze at the familiar voice. Speak of the devil. His footsteps echoed in the hallway as they drew closer, being the only thing to break the silence, since mine had stopped. He put one hand on my shoulder and I turned slowly, keeping my head down as to not look him in the face. Mags, come on. Look at me, please. I sighed deeply and turned my face up to him. A sweet smile spread across his face, which made my stomach clench and flip uncomfortably. See, now that wasn't so hard. Andrew, my mouth hung open at a loss for words. I shook my head and turned, trying to make a quick escape. Again, keyword, trying. He grabbed my wrist and spun me back around so I was facing him. Come on, Megs. We've known each other since preschool. I can read you like an open book. He reached his hand up and brushed a piece of stray hair from my face. You can't stand here and tell me that you don't feel anything. You can't tell me that that blush means nothing. He brushed his thumb against my cheek, where I could feel the blood begin to gather. You can't tell me that that kiss meant nothing, because keep in mind, you kissed me back. His hand griped the back of my neck gently as he began to lean his face closer to mine. At the last second before his lips touched mine, I turned my head to the side. His lips landed on my cheek and he pulled back, confused. I think it's best. My voice came out in barely a whisper. If you don't talk to me, Andrew, I think we should keep our distance. Please just leave me alone. And with that I turned, his hand falling from my face to dangle at his side, and walked back to my room without turning back. It had been a week and I had put every effort into avoiding Andrew. Every time he had tried to talk to me, I made some excuse, or just flat out ran away. I wasn't ready to face him. After all, just a week ago he had confessed to having loved me since kindergarten. I felt horrible for hurting him, and missed talking to him terribly. Every time I heard his voice calling me across the yard, I wanted so bad to run to him. But in the end, I just couldn't. He wanted to know how I felt, but I couldn't tell him that. Because I didn't know. I hadn't talked to Ellie, Faith, or Bailey about any of this because I knew it would bring about a set of questions that I just wasn't ready to answer. Though I hadn't told them, they had noticed me trying to avoid him and the tension between us when proximity couldn't be helped. I wasn't sure if they had talked to Andrew, but they hadn't said a word to me about it. The only way that I knew they knew was the questioning looks they gave us. Davo was a slightly different story. I continued to talk to him, though it would get a little awkward at times. But for the most part, we went back to the way we were before, that almost kiss in the rain all but forgotten. If only it could be as easy with Andrew. And not even to mention the hostility between Davo and Andrew. Every time they got near each other, it looked as if they would jump on each other any second. Sometimes I would catch them looking at each other from across the yard, Andrew looking sad and jealous, and Davo looking smug with a mocking smile. I never said anything, though, not wanting to bring the events to attention and run the risk of having to discuss it. We were all sitting on the couches in the rec room, an awkward silence filling the room like smog. Thick and choking. Okay, that's it, exclaimed Bailey, standing up and putting her hands on her hips. I'm tired of all this tension between you two. She looked pointedly at Andrew and I. We are going to go swimming. You are going to talk to each other and have fun, whether you like it or not. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, making it clear that there was no arguing on this one. We all reluctantly got up and followed Bailey out the door. Actually, guys, said Ellie, I'm going to hang back. There are some things I've got to take care of. Okay, see ya, said Cease. We all said our goodbyes as Ellie ran back into the house and the rest of our party followed Bailey into the forest. Water sprayed on me as Cease did a cannonball into the small lake. Bailey had led us to a lake she had found some time ago. It had a high ledge, easily 15 feet, which had a waterfall cascading down it. The water was different depths in different areas, maybe 12 feet at its deepest and a crystal clear blue-green. It was beautiful to say the least. I sat on a rock at the edge of the lake, watching a small silver fish darted back and forth under the rippled surface. Come on in, Maggie, Cease yelled from the water. I sighed and dived in head first, knowing if I didn't come willingly, she would most likely just pull me in. The cool, refreshing water encased me, making the world go silent for a few moments before I broke the surface. I swam over to Cease just as she yelled, You too, Andrew. Don't make me come over there. I looked in the direction she was to see and were sitting on the edge of the lake, dangling his feet in the water. He slowly lowered himself into the water and swam over to her. I took that as my cue to leave. I began to swim away only to have Bailey latch one hand around my arm and tow me back. Oh no, you're not going anywhere, she whispered. We were in one of the shallower parts of the lake, so we could all stand without having to tread water. Bailey pulled me until I was standing right next to Andrew. My muscles tensed nervously. I could almost feel the tension growing between us. Cease and Bailey stood in front of us, their arms crossed over their chests and wearing identical stern. No BS looks. "Okay, you two," began Cease. "We don't know exactly what is going on, but you guys need to cut this out." "Yeah," agreed Bailey. "For the past week you've barely said the words to each other. She pointed at Andrew, have been all sad and cynical, and every time you see Maggie, it gets worse. And you," she turned her accusing finger to me, "have been literally running away from him every attempt to talk to you. If you don't want to tell us what's going on, fine," Cease got in. "But you two need to work this out. We'll just keep pushing until you do, so there's really no use in putting this off." "Now talk," ordered Bailey. "Geez, did they rehearse this or something?" "I don't know, but either way, this isn't going to be good." We stood in silence for a minute, the tension rising under the hawk like glares of Bailey and Cease. "Look, Mags." Before Andrew could finish his sentence, his eyes glazed over and he looked off into space, as if seeing something far away from here. "Hello?" I asked, waving my hand in front of his face. I turned to Cease and Bailey to see the same blank look on their faces. Davo swam up behind me. "What's their problem?" he asked. "No clue." Just then Andrew's eyes seemed to focus back on the here and now and looked down at me. "Connor wants us," he said, sounding a little disappointed. "He says it's urgent." He looked down at me longingly, looking frustrated that he had been interrupted from what he was saying. "Yeah, we should go," said Cease. He sounded kind of worried. "Yeah, let's go. But don't think this is over, you two." Bailey narrowed her eyes at us. We all got out of the lake and ran back to the house in silence, the wind from the force of our run drying our cloths considerably. When we got there, we saw the entire of the pack outside, all faced towards the picnic table that Connor was standing up on. The crowd was silent except for the occasional whisper. Connor turned his head to see us enter the clearing. The look in his eyes shocked me. It was so hurt, so torn, and desperate. He looked as if someone just told him that he only had a day to live. His eyes seemed sunken and distant. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he paced back and forth on the table nervously. Something was wrong, very wrong. He breathed a deep sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. Well, I'm not completely sure how to say this," he said, loud enough that the whole pack could hear. "I've been going over our records and I've noticed something." He raked his fingers through his hair. "In our past fights with Danny's pack, they've anticipated our every step, known our every move. They've known things that only our own pack knows, and though I've exhausted every other possible explanation, I've only found one to be plausible." He looked over the entire pack before speaking. "Someone here has been feeding information to them. It seems that there's a mole in our pack." A chorus of gasps and frantic whispers erupted from the crowd. A memory flashed into my mind. "Our informant has notified us of an impending attack. Said Danny they will come from the north. They were planning on taking us by surprise here in our camp." He had said it himself. He had an informant. There was a traitor among us. Werewolf Forest, a Chapter 19 recap. A memory flashed into my mind. "Our informant has notified us of an impending attack. Said Danny they will come from the north. They were planning on taking us by surprise here in our camp." He had said it himself. He had an informant. There was a traitor among us who... Someone yelled from the crowd. "Yeah, who is it?" Yelled another. More and more voices demanding the name of the traitor erupted from the growing mob. "We don't know who it is." Connor's voice silenced the crowd, and because of that, his voice began to falter. "Our council has..." His voice trailed off as he looked over at me, our eyes connecting. It was almost like their warm brown was trying to convey a message to me, though what it was, I wasn't sure. Our council has decided to quarantine possible threats, interjected Sasha as she stepped up on the picnic table beside Connor, who was still staring over at me. Gunnar. Cameron. She looked down at the men and jerked her head in our general direction. What's going on? Why is everyone staring at us? Davo whispered in my ear. I looked around to see the entire pack's eyes trained on our small group. No clue, I whispered back. The two men, Gunnar and Cameron, began to walk toward us. Andrew placed his hand on one of their shoulders as they got closer. Cameron, what's going on here? The man looked down slightly at Andrew, being at least 2 inches taller than him, then down at his feet, unable to hold eye contact. I'm sorry, Andrew. The man, Cameron, said as he brushed past Andrew and stood in front of me. You need to come with me, he said, lightly grabbing onto my arm. You too, said the other man, Gunnar, as he placed a hand on Davo's shoulder. Why? I stared over at him, completely oblivious to what was going on. You've both been identified as potential threats, Gunnar replied, his voice flattened emotional. As he said this, more whispers of confusion erupted from the crowd. Why? We haven't done anything wrong, I argued, wrenching my arm out of Cameron's grasp. He mumbled about making this harder than it needs to be, but I could care less as I glared daggers at Gunnar. Maybe not. I turned around to see Sasha sauntering towards me, arrogance radiating off her with every step. But we have to take these precautions, you know. Every word that dripped from her mouth was laced with mockery and sarcasm. They also made me want to wipe that arrogant little smirk off of her face. You two both arrived here under suspicious circumstances, and you're not even part of this pack. How can you expect us to trust you when you have no loyalties to us? And the council decided just that with a majority vote, we can't trust you. So, like I said before, we will be quarantining you until further notice. Cameron grabbed onto my arm again and began to drag me towards the house. I turned around as much as I could to see Gunnar leading Davo on behind me. Davo wasn't struggling in the slightest. He simply walked forward at the guidance of Gunnar's hand with a blank expression on his face, as if he was unsurprised by all of this, as if he expected this would happen. Why wasn't I called in for the vote? Andrew questioned Connor. Before Connor could respond, Sasha walked up behind him. Oh, please, Andrew, she said, rolling her eyes. We all knew what your vote was. Not that it would have mattered anyway. A triumphant smile spread across her lips. What was the vote? Andrew was getting desperate now. I could see his chest rising and falling in rapid succession and the panic look in his eyes. Not including you. Connor cut in, his voice rough with the bitter cynicism that comes with betrayal and defeat. For 2-1. Andrew's eyes closed and his head fell slightly as he let go a defeated sigh. That's right, Andrew. Not even a close call. The smirk on Sasha's face was now gone, replaced with an angry scowl. There's nothing you can do. Take them to the basement. She ordered the men without releasing Andrew from her glare. Cameron began to pull on my arm again, and I followed willingly. I looked back once more to see Connor's eyes still trained on me. I now understood the message his eyes were trying to convey. It was an apology. I turned around again and walked at the lid of Cameron's hand around my arm. The eyes of the dumbfounded pack burned into my skin as we walked through the double doors, Gunnar and Davo not far behind. They led us to a small door I had never noticed before. It was on the side of the stairs and was shaped as such, one side dipping downwards to fit into the triangular shape. Cameron reached into his pocket and took out a small silver key. As he twisted the key in the lock, the door creaked open, a dank and musty smell exuding from the darkness. Go, ordered Cameron as he pushed on my shoulder. I bent down slightly as I cautiously walked through the small doorway. Even being a mere 5'10" 3. The frame of the door was well below my head. Cameron grabbed onto my elbow to help me down the steps, but I jerked my arm away and began to descend the steep incline on my own, the others falling in step behind me. A small light was flickering at the bottom of the stairs, giving off a soft teary glow. When I reached the bottom, I stopped, shocked at my surroundings. The walls and floor were bare concrete, the floor darker in places from the water dripping from the pipes that lined the ceiling. There was only one window. It was about the size of a shoebox and was so covered in dirt and grime that it let next to no light in. The only real source of light was the single flickering fluorescent bulb above our heads. It gave off enough light to let us see the room clearly, though there were still dark places that had eluded the smattering amount of light. Seeing the house from above, you would never expect what I saw down there. Upstairs was light, open and welcoming. The windows were large and clear, and the furniture and wallpaper made it feel like home. It looked like a place that, though I knew otherwise, not a bad thing existed. Like all of your worries could be gone with a single step in the door. From upstairs, you would never expect to see cages lining the walls just a single floor below you. There were 8 of them, 6 small prison cell-like rooms that lined one wall and had thick concrete walls separating them. Each had a ratty old mattress sitting on the ground and a large barred door. 2 of the 6 had solid metal doors with only a small window in the top to look through. The other 2 were larger, at least 3 times what the others were, and had 4 mattresses lined up in a haphazard row. Cameron unlocked the door to one of the larger ones and stood aside, motioning for us to go in. I walked through the door, knowing they would force me to anyway. I didn't turn around until I heard the door clink shut and Cameron's and Gunner's footsteps fade away as they went back to join the rest of the pack. I slid my back down a wall and pulled my knees up to my chest as Davo silently walked to the mattresses and sat on one of them, resting his head in his hands. We sat like that, listening to the steady sound of the water dripping from the leaky pipes and watching the light flicker above us. Seeing the house from above, you would never expect what I saw down there. From upstairs, you would never expect to see a dungeon. Thank you all for joining me in the wild world of Wild Werewolf. I hope you had an amazing time. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments and likes, and come back for more wild adventures. See you next time.